Hey guys, how's it going? All right, so welcome to Daniel 5. My wife is taking a nap, so I'm not able to use my laptop. My voice is too deep and carries too well, so it would keep her awake. But it's okay because the real nitty gritty stuff, the real meat and potatoes, isn't going to hit until Daniel 7. So Daniel 5 and Daniel 6 we can do on the cell phone because there's not a whole lot we're going to have to dig into. And if there is, we'll just jump over to Google and we'll look it up. But right now, let's get into this Daniel 5. And this is Belshazzar's feast. Now, Belshazzar was the son of Nebuchadnezzar. You remember the last chapter, Nebuchadnezzar was having problems with all these dreams, and then the Lord did something with him, made him like a cow, and then he came out of it and he glorified God. He's coming around. He's realizing the truth. God was even talking directly to him at some point. But now Belshazzar, different person, different king, is having an issue, and the Lord deals with him too, but in a much different way. Belshazzar's feast. Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of the thousands. This is a big party. 1,000 people, 1,000 lords. That's just the lords. That's not the people that came with him. Verse 2, while he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father, Nebuchadnezzar, had taken from the temple, which had been in Jerusalem, that the king with his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. Those things have no gods. These are invented gods. In the same hour, verse 5, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. He saw the fingers, the hand part. Now, most people almost universally agree this was Christ writing on the wall. This was Jesus. Then the king's countenance changed, verse 6, and his thoughts troubled him, so that they troubled him so badly, so that the joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked against each other. It's thought, and I've always had this idea, but a lot of other people do too, that his bowels let loose. His hip joints. I mean, if his hip joints were loose, he wouldn't be able to stand up. But his knees were not going to get. His bowels actually let loose. He actually had an accident because he was so scared. And of course, he'd been drinking a bunch, so I mean, kind of natural that might happen. Being so scared because he was all proud and all high and mighty until he saw that and it freaked him out. Verse 7, the king cried aloud to bring the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. The king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads the writing and tells me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and he shall be the third ruler of the kingdom. Now all the king's wise men came, but they could not read the writing or make known the king its interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly troubled. His countenance was changed, and his lords were astonished. The queen, because of the words of the king and the lords, came to the banquet hall. The queen spoke, saying, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy God. Interesting confession by her. And in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. So Daniel's already been through this before with Nebuchadnezzar. Now he's having to deal with this with his son Belshazzar. Inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will give the interpretation. Interesting that this guy's Belshazzar, and he named Daniel Belteshazzar. It's almost like he looked at him as a son, because he named him almost after a son. Verse 13, then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, are you that Daniel who was one of the captives from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard of you, that the Spirit of God is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. This should be a confession of most people concerning us. In some way, they may not like it, but they should have some form of okay, I know who this person is. I can see that this person is. Verse 15, and it's so funny that they know this about him, yet they don't glorify God. You'd think that would be enough to convince them, but it's not. Verse 15, now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known to me its interpretation. But they could not give the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of you, that you can give interpretations and explain enigmas. Now if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple, and have a chain of gold around your neck. He already had purple and gold, so he's going to get more. And shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. He's taking a very high position here. God takes care of his people. Verse 17, then Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself. You keep them, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. Daniel didn't want recognition. You need this interpreted? I got it. But I don't want your recognition. You keep it. He already had it anyway, because that's what Nebuchadnezzar gave him. Verse 18, O king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty, glory, and honor. And because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up. And whomever he wished, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men, and appoints over it whomever he chooses. So he's basically giving the confession of what happened to him, but he's doing this for a very specific point. Verse 22, but you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. So he was aware, and he didn't change. He saw what happened, didn't change. He knew who Daniel was. Didn't change. Verse 23, and you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver, gold, bronze, and iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know. And the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not glorified. Interesting what Daniel says here. These gods don't see or know or hear or know. Where else is that in the Bible where he talks about these idols they worship? There's actually several places in the New Testament, or in the Old Testament. I think at least one in the New Testament. These idols don't hear, don't see, don't speak. Verse 24, then the fingers of the hand were sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the inscription that was written. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upsharan, or Upharsin. This is the interpretation of each word. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, and I don't know where this Perez came in, unless it was another version of the Upharsin. But your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. So he kept his promise. Might not have enjoyed that very much, but he kept his promise, which was good on his part. But verse 30, that very night Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Medes and the Persians. And today, it's still that way. That whole area is Iraq, which is Arabic in nature, and it basically is part of, I mean, Iraq is a separate nation, but it's part of the Mede-Persian Empire, which would be Iran and Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, all the stands. And so that's all part of that kingdom to this very day. What's interesting is that his son, that he named Daniel Belteshazzar. His son was named Belshazzar. It's so close. It's like he looked upon Daniel more than he did his son. Now, if you did a little deep dive into why there's a T in there, that would probably, the name is different. It would have a different meaning than what his son's name would have. But how interesting that his son already knew all these things. Daniel reminded him, you knew all this. You saw all this happen. It's your father. And he tried to give him the same gift. It's almost as if he was testing him or tempting him. And he's like, no, I don't want this. Your father already gave me all this and made me run the show for all these guys. And then had to kill a bunch of them. But I just want to do my thing and be left alone. But instead, he's trying to drag him around. And then he gives him the interpretation and the dude dies that night. I mean, at least he didn't torment him. He kept his promise. But that may have been because a whole bunch of people had been won over by what had happened before. And so they may not necessarily have liked Belshazzar. So, because it didn't sound like he was all that great a guy. But anyway, the Lord protects his people. He uplifts his people. He helps his people. And so it's amazing that this is happening to Daniel. Daniel doesn't want this attention, and yet the Lord's putting him in this position. He's the third ruler of the whole kingdom. And that Babylon was huge. In its heyday, it extended over 100 miles each side of the Euphrates River. I'm sorry, was it Euphrates or Tigris? I think it was Tigris. Each side, 100 miles each way. The core of the city is still there. The core area, that would have been all the king's area. But the city, all the people and all that stuff extended 100 miles in each direction at least. That's a big city. To this day, you go down there and you sift around the dirt, you find pottery and all kinds of stuff. All the ruins, a bunch of the ruins are still there, buried in the ground. But it's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Daniel was there for all this. He was there to watch the unfolding of this. I don't know how impressed he was with it. Probably not. He's probably not even happy to be there. He'd rather be back in Jerusalem, but here he is. And so the Lord is dealing with this. Nebuchadnezzar, good to go, got him squared away. Belshazzar wouldn't do it. And so the Lord was like, you weighed, you found wanting, you're getting taken out. And so he took him out and put the other guy in there. Who was the other guy's name? Darius the Mede. Put him in there. So now he's under Darius. So this is the third ruler he's been under so far. And then so the next video will be Daniel 6, the plot against Daniel, where they're going to try to see if they can take him out. I guess it would be Darius. So yeah, God's going to watch over him. God's going to protect him. God's going to keep him going, because there's still a lot more he has to do. That will be all the good stuff is going to really start kicking up in Daniel 7. And we're going to be on the laptop for that, because there's a lot to cover. So guys, that was Daniel 5. Thank you all for watching. And I'll see you guys in the next video.